Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is Kira Brady, and I will be hosting our seminar today with Learn Energy Society. As an artist, actor, and drama facilitator with over 15 years' experience in the film industry, I have a special interest in the environment and sustainability. I am delighted to be with you here today as we learn about what is happening in outer space to reduce climate change. Today, we will introduce you to a fantastic Canadian company making great strides in the quest for net zero emissions. We are so excited to talk to you about what we're doing and why this meeting with you guys is the most exciting part of what we do. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that this meeting is being hosted on Treaty 6 territory in the lands colonially known as Edmonton, Alberta. On behalf of Learn Energy, we acknowledge Treaty 6 territory as the traditional and ancestral territory of the Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, and Nakota Sioux. We acknowledge that this territory is home to the Métis settlements and Métis Nation of Alberta, Regions 2, 3, and 4 within the historical Northwest Métis homeland. As we discuss what we do at Learn Energy, it will be evident that our priority is in doing our part to help society reduce emissions and become better caretakers of our planet. We cannot do this properly without acknowledging and honouring the Indigenous perspective within the lands that we operate on. We are here to talk to you about climate change and sustainability, which we recognise as a huge and divisive topic, and we understand that after almost a full lifetime of growing up and hearing about it, you all have your own distinct ideas and opinions on the issue. What we want to do today is simply introduce you all to a Canadian company that is making great strides to approach these difficult and complex issues with exciting and unique solutions. In other words, we want to show you what is being done and not just tell you what you need to do. Learn Energy believes that young people are more than capable of figuring out how they will make their own unique impact. And we want our role to be one of empowerment, whatever that looks like. Learn Energy is not trying to claim that we have all the answers. Nobody does. However, we are trying our best to do our part in what we call the quest for net zero emissions. Our organisation recognises that we all need to work together to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. I'll ask that you keep your mics and cameras off for the duration of the meeting. And if you have any questions, the teachers can direct them to me in the chat, and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. In the quest towards net zero emissions, industries need accurate and timely measurements of greenhouse gas emissions to help inform their emissions management and mitigation activities. This presentation gives an overview of GHGSat's approach to providing actionable data. They do this by detecting and quantifying methane and carbon dioxide emissions using their fleet of space-based and airborne instruments. Our speaker today is very interesting. Warren Shaw is the Manager of Training and Development at GHGSat. This company is a leading-edge Canadian and space and data technology company. It provides greenhouse gas emissions monitoring solutions using satellites and airborne instruments. Warren's educational background is in astrophysics and physics, with an undergraduate degree from the University of Calgary and a graduate degree from the University of Victoria. Warren has over 16 years' experience in airborne remote sensing and hyperspectral imaging. Over that time, he has held a variety of positions, including research scientist, instrument calibration manager, and field operations manager. He joined GHGSat almost 7 years ago as the airborne systems manager, helping to develop the airborne instruments and lead their operations at GHGSat. A lifelong learner, Warren is currently taking classes towards a graduate certificate in leadership from Ambrose University and continuing education classes towards a certificate in workplace learning from the University of Calgary. Welcome, Warren.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that kind introduction, and welcome to everyone connecting. Thank you for joining. It's my privilege to share with you a little bit about what we're doing at GHGSat in terms of measuring greenhouse gases and how that can lead to some visible action, especially in that idea of towards net zero. So I'm going to quickly share my screen. So hopefully you can all see that. And we'll just dive into it. So yeah, really what I'm going to be focusing on is that idea of how do we make some measurements of these greenhouse gases, these invisible gases, and then how does that then drive some action that people can take and industries can take towards reducing those emissions. So start off with GHGSat. So what we do is built right into our name. So we use satellites primarily to detect greenhouse gas emissions. We're a Canadian company, so I'm based in Calgary. We have offices in Ottawa and Montreal, as well as in London, UK, and employees around the world. And we're one of the leaders in methane monitoring, especially using satellite technology. So we're the only ones with a commercial satellite fleet of instruments that's capable of measuring these greenhouse gases at the facility level. Now, there's lots of other satellites out there that are making measurements of greenhouse gases and other technologies as well. And we can talk a little bit more about that. But yeah, one of the things we'll focus on is that idea of at the facility level. So I'll talk a bit more about that. We're developing our own proprietary technology right here in Canada. So this is an exciting way that Canada is contributing to this global challenge. And we are a partner with industries, some of the industries who are causing some of the emissions. We're partners with other stakeholders like governments or even financial sectors that are interested in this kind of information to get some insightful data and to help make some business decisions. So we're not out to just blast emissions out there and point the finger at anyone. We really want to work with all these partners to give them a tool that helps them make some good decisions about their emissions and reducing those emissions. So yeah, for the talk, we're going to be talking about mapping the invisible. So how do we use satellite and airborne? That's an area where I've got a bit of experience. But how are we using these instruments and how does it detect these greenhouse gases? And then from that, how does that enable some visible action towards mitigating and reducing and getting closer to net zero? So that's sort of the overview, and we'll dive right into it. And I'm going to start off with a quick video that will sort of give you a high-level view of kind of what GHGSat's all about. So there should be some music playing in the background along with this. It's a short 2-minute video. So we'll just kick this off with this, and then we'll dive in deeper. So hopefully you enjoy this. Okay. Hopefully that was enjoyable. Give you a bit of an overview of our technology, who we're working with, and kind of what we're all about. So what I'd love to do is to dive in a little bit and focus on why methane. So greenhouse gases, we're going to be talking a lot about methane. So why is that an important one to focus on? And so you saw it in the video there. There's this one shot where it showed that methane is accounts for about 25% of all global warming. And we're talking about human-caused industrial methane emissions here, right? So it's the second most abundant greenhouse gas in the atmosphere, carbon dioxide being the first. And methane's coming from a lot of industries. So oil and gas industries, waste management, that's like landfills, coal mining as well. And so we want to help these industries get some of the data on their methane emissions. And methane is really seen as a bit of a low-hanging fruit, or we really want to make some gains here for an interesting reason. So you saw this in the video as well, that on a short time frame, a molecule of methane has 84 times the heating power of a molecule of carbon dioxide. So it's a more potent greenhouse gas in the atmosphere, right? So if we can get this out of there, we're making a gain in general, but specifically, methane also has a shorter lifetime in the atmosphere. So there are some natural mechanisms where methane can come out of the atmosphere after about an average of only 12 years. And so what that means is if we can really reduce methane emissions, then we can actually slow down the impact to the climate. So, reducing industrial methane emissions is one of the fastest ways to slow global warming. And so that's why it's got a lot of focus, especially in these industries. Let's make gains on methane, and then we'll tackle carbon dioxide as well. So that's why we're focusing on methane. Why do we use satellites? Well, air pollution, these emissions going into the atmosphere, it's a global problem, right? The air doesn't just stick with a certain country, it goes all over. And we've experienced that with wildfires and smoke coming from long distances. So we need a global solution. And satellites are really interesting because, of course, once they're in space, they can see all parts of the globe, depending on their type of orbit. And so there's a couple of different types of satellites out there that can contribute to monitoring for greenhouse gases. So one of them is called an area flux mapper. And this is probably what you think of when you think of a satellite up there, taking measurements of the atmosphere, trying to understand, what's going on in the atmosphere from a global level. And all of that information and that science is feeding into the climate science, right? So we're getting a picture of, just where are the emissions and how's it all going. But the challenge with these is that don't have the resolution to see specifically, who is causing the emissions, right? So we know that there's a region perhaps of elevated emissions coming from somewhere. What's the actual site that has a leak of emissions? And so that's why we also need another type of satellite, which would be called a point source imager. And so these ones, and this is what GHGSat does. So we're not trying to map the whole globe all at once. We're like looking down a drinking straw. We have a very small field of view, and we're not continually recording. We're targeting specific sites around the world so that we can see if there's any emissions from there, and then we have the resolution to be able to attribute to a certain site, whether it's a coal mine or a landfill or a gas plant or something like that. And so GHGSat satellites, they go into the orbit, and each satellite can take those pinpoint measurements. And one of the things we want to do as a company is we want to grow our constellation of these satellites, because having more satellites up there that's able to do that means that the number of sites that we can image goes up. And of course, the frequency that we can go back and continue to image a certain site increases as well. And you can see there, so that's a picture of one of our first satellites. And it's only about 40 centimeters, right? So it's about the size of your microwave oven. So this is the technology that we're working with. And so what we do with that is we obviously got to get it into space. So we've been working with SpaceX to launch our satellites. So what you're seeing on the bottom there is from Transporter 7 mission. And this is now that the rocket is up in orbit, it's starting to kick out all these little satellites that got a ride along with it. And so you can see our C7 satellite getting ejected from the rocket right there in the bottom left. And our satellites are in orbits which are called sun-synchronous polar orbits. So they kind of just rotate in a circle around the Earth, sort of north-south, and then the Earth is rotating under it. And so that combination of the Earth rotation and the circular orbit means that the satellite can see, every part of the Earth eventually. And so each satellite's doing about 15 orbits per day, and that can lead to up to about 60 observations per day. And we're only taking measurements on the sunlit side of the Earth. So on the dark side of the Earth, we're not taking any measurements. And the reason is the way that our technology is working is we need that sun to illuminate the ground. Our systems work on what's called absorption spectroscopy. So consider this, consider a light bulb. This would be an incandescent light bulb. So one of the ones that gets hot when you touch it, right? That's giving off light at lots of different wavelengths. It's giving off white light. And let's say it passes through a prism, and you guys are probably familiar with this either in the science lab or somewhere or in videos. It spreads it out spatially so that we can see all the different colors of the light. And so that prism is acting like a spectrograph or a spectrometer. It's breaking the light up. What happens is when that light passes through some sort of gas, the molecules of that gas will actually absorb some of that light. And how it shows up then in the spectrum, in the colors here, is you see there's some missing colors. So some of the light has been absorbed at very specific wavelengths because of the gas that's there. And so that's exactly what we're doing in space. We're using the sun as a light bulb. That light is shining down onto the surface and reflecting back up to our satellites where we take the measurement. But as it does that, it's going through that very thin atmosphere. And so carbon dioxide and methane primarily, they're absorbing at very specific wavelengths. And so if we see a reduction in the signal at those wavelengths, it means that there's some of that greenhouse gas there. So what we do is we send a coordinate up to our satellite of, hey, we want to target this facility. And as the satellite is going through its orbit, it knows what it needs to do. So as it approaches that, it'll start to take a series of measurements, snapshots, images, and it builds up this sequence of hundreds of images, and then it continues down orbit. And you saw there in that little animation, it actually does a panning maneuver. So it tries to stay pointed at that target as long as possible. It's moving at 7 kilometers a second. So we only have about 20 seconds over any given target. It continues down orbit, and then we eventually downlink that data to a ground station, and then we get it to our servers, and we're able to process that imagery. And eventually what we do is we build up this, it's called the spectral profile, just like those colors that you saw coming out of the prism. We get information about every ground location, and we have the wavelength information. And so when we do the processing, if we see these depths at very specific locations, it means that there's some of that greenhouse gas there. And the strength of that absorption feature is proportional to the amount of gas. So not only can we detect it, but we can actually quantify how much is there. And that's one of those actionable data pieces that we can provide to our customers. So what does it look like? So here's an example from an oil and gas facility, and you saw some of the ones in the videos, right? So we kind of create this false color image of the methane plume, and then we overlay that, and it's geo-referenced because we have the ability to figure out what the ground location was from that. And then we overlay that onto, Google Earth or Mapbox or some other visible imagery. And so then you can really start to see what could be the potential source for this emission. So in this case, this is an oil and gas area, and you can see here lots of different well pads and compressor stations, all these different things. With the resolution we have, we can see that this emission, and depending on the direction of the wind, we can see that this emission started on this side of this pad here. And, it's not its neighbor over here. And that's important information. If you've got different companies operating in a certain area, we need to make sure we know who's responsible for that emission. So that's an example from oil and gas. Coal mining, you can kind of see a bit of coal here. This is a European coal mine, so you see some coal here, but this mine is actually mostly underground. And so what they do is they have to, as they produce that coal, it can create some methane emissions. And so they have to ventilate the mine to get that methane out. And so you get these vent stacks where methane comes out, and it looks like, again, like these plumes. And so we can monitor those and measure those and help them understand their emissions. And so in oil and gas, it might be a leak, right? It's a faulty piece of infrastructure causing those emissions. In mining, this is a natural part of this process, right? So for them, it's about, they know they're going to have emissions. So now it's about how big are they, and are they what we expect, or is there something going on? Another one is landfills. So you can kind of see a bit more on the right here, this sort of larger area. as that matter is kind of decomposing, it can produce methane. And a lot of landfills are trying to trap that gas because then they could turn it into an energy source. But there could be some emissions or untrapped gas, and so we can help them understand their emissions. And this was a fun one as well, right? Cow burps from space. So you put enough cows in an area like a dairy or a feedlot, and that's what we're showing here is a feedlot. You can kind of see this dark area. As those cows digest, they can actually create methane as well. And it always causes a smile when you see a news article coming from CNN that says cow burp from space. But this is another industry where we can help them understand some of the emissions, agricultural industries. One quick slide on airborne, because this is, again, a bit where my experience is. So the satellites are good, but they're high up there. And some of our customers, they want a closer picture to the ground. They want even finer spatial information. And so what we've done is we've taken the same satellite technology and we've put it into a platform that can get installed into a little survey plane. So this is a twin-engine Navajo here on the left. And it has a hole cut in the bottom of it, a survey port. And then we can install our camera, and then, with a pilot and an operator in the back controlling the equipment, we can go and fly missions and monitor methane emissions, and bringing that view of their emissions that's slightly different. So you can see from this example here, much finer resolution. Here's a piece of oil and gas infrastructure, and we can see it looks like there's sort of two strong signals coming off of this set of tanks here. We can actually get closer to understanding where are those emissions coming from and pass that along to our customers. So all of that's been about methane, but as we talked about earlier, carbon dioxide, it's the most prominent greenhouse gas. And so we need to make some strides towards that as well. So just last year, again, on a SpaceX rocket, we launched 3 satellites, one of which was tailored for carbon dioxide. The other 2 were still methane satellites. And so, carbon dioxide is another one that we want to focus on. And really what we're able to do currently is to focus on really big power plants. Maybe they're burning coal or burning some other fuel and generating electricity. And as part of that, they're giving off carbon dioxide. So this is really timely because we were finally able to release some images from this carbon dioxide instrument just last month. So this is pretty fresh. So you're seeing a power plant here with some emission stacks, and you can see that carbon dioxide plume coming off of it. So it's exciting times to be getting into this greenhouse gas as well. Really quickly here as we finish up, how do we get to the visible action? How does this have an impact? So going back to that idea of net zero, so the way I like to think about it is this is an equation, right? You have industries that have emissions going into the atmosphere, and to be net zero, there has to be something pulling the emissions out of the atmosphere, whether it's planting more trees to absorb some of that carbon or sequestering it using other technologies. But the idea here is that your emissions are balanced by your absorptions, and so you're net zero, right? So reducing emissions is certainly helpful, and then when we can help customers find their leaks, their emissions go down. But there's going to be some industries that always have some emissions, and it's just going to be a part of that. So by understanding how much those emissions are, they know how much mitigation or absorption or sequestering that they have to do to try to get to net zero. And a lot of companies have made pledges to try to get to net zero by 2050, governments as well. So where GHGSat really fits in is this idea that in order to understand this equation and you really need those accurate emissions measurements. How much are we putting out so that we know how much we have to try to offset through carbon offsets or planting trees or whatever. So that's how we fit into that net zero conversation. And those measurements that we're making a lot of them, and we're helping across the world. So here's another example, right? So last year we had over 14,000 methane detections all over the world in all those different industries. And so that information is getting into those operators, those stakeholders, and they're able to take that data and make some decisions. And so this was, again, in that video you watched. And so again, just looking at 2023, and in this case, just looking at oil and gas, if you add up all the amount of methane emissions and then you convert it into a common baseline, which is called carbon dioxide equivalent, it's kind of like just so people who are measuring emissions, you're comparing apples to apples. So we do that computation and conversion. And so in 2023, we had 183 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalents detected. Okay, so all that information is being provided to the operators, and then they can make decisions about how they reduce it. And one of the things that we're trying to do at GHGSat is follow up with our customers and say, hey, how did that image of that plume, how did that impact? Were you able to shut that leak down or whatever it happens to be? And so we can at least say, and we want to get better at working with our customers on this, but we can at least say that 6 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalents were prevented from going into the atmosphere based on some of our data over the course of the year. So that's like 1.4 million cars on the road for a year, that amount of emissions. And so we're trying to have a real impact here by getting that actionable data to people. We can't turn off the leaks, we can't stop the emissions ourselves, but we can help them make those kind of decisions. So conclude then, climate change, that's a global challenge. And for any global challenge, a satellite can be a pretty cool piece of technology that can make a difference. But it's not just climate change. There's lots of other applications out there that technology could come in play, like wildfire detection or other things like that. And so satellites are a great tool. And what's great is that Canada's playing a role here, right? We're known for a lot of innovation. And so we are developing things that we can, contribute to the world and share that technology and share that knowledge with the world. But these are big challenges, and it's not going to go away soon. And so, what I'm encouraging students when I talk to students is that idea of, try to find what's that thing that you're good at and how does that fit with one of these big challenges? And when you find that meshing, it's a good place for a career direction. And it doesn't have to be just the science and the engineering and the technology, right? We need people supporting all the businesses doing that. So accountants and lawyers and graphic designers and all those different things that support. But you're all working towards addressing a global challenge. So I'm really excited, and I'm sure that there's actually not only Canadian satellites, but there's going to be Canadian students like you who are going to be making some contributions to these kind of big challenges in the future. So I'm happy to take some questions. And yeah, I just want to say thank you again for your attention. Appreciate the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Warren. That was a really interesting presentation. And we have a couple of questions come in here.
Sure.
What do the different colors mean? I think that's in relation to when you have your satellite pointing down to the sites that the emissions are coming from.
Yeah, that's a great question. And so it's like a heat map. So where there's a stronger red or orange color, it means that the concentration of that greenhouse gas is more intense. And as it sort of filters out towards the blues and the purples, that's where the concentration is diminishing, and eventually we can't distinguish it from the background. And so by seeing those different colors, you're starting to see the strength of the emission. And that's what helps us understand what could be the source, because the highest concentration is going to be, right over the gas leak or right over the emission stack. So seeing that color scheme gives us a real indication of the strength of the plume and the shape of the plume and how it's interacting with the wind. Great question.
Wow, that's fascinating. Sorry, I just missed at the start. Is it a particular color, or is it the strength of the color?
Yeah, that's a great question. So because we're operating in the infrared, we can't actually see this with our eyes. That's why it's kind of like invisible, these gases. But when we take the picture with our detectors that are sensitive in the infrared, it's what's called false color. So the red will correspond to a specific wavelength,
Wow,
but it's different than the
that
visible
is
red that we
incredible.
see. Yeah, it's a false color, but there's a gradient there, right? There's that idea that the reds and the yellows, that's the higher in that corresponds to a stronger source of emissions. So the colors are there to guide us as humans, give us a visual representation. But in principle, you can't see these plumes with your eyes because they are in the
Mhm.
infrared. Yeah.
Wow. Um, do you ever get eco anxiety? And if so, what do you do to deal with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I wouldn't say that I feel that. Like level of anxiety myself. I think partially because I'm kind of working in a company that is is working towards this. So, for sure you hear the news stories and you hear some of the challenges that we're trying to face, and it can weigh down on you a bit. At the same time, though, there's companies like GHGSat. There's a lot of other companies in Alberta, especially, and in Canada, who are making strides to try to address this. So I think for me, it's about focusing on what we are trying to do to make a difference, and that goes at our individual level. What are my choices? How am I contributing to being a part of the solution and not the problem? And then how do I choose to spend my time, and in this case, my career, in contributing towards a company and priorities that will also make a difference. So, yeah, I think if I'm starting to feel a bit more of that anxiety, for me, it's about shifting the focus back to what's actually being done, and where are the good news stories that we can focus on.
That's great. Yeah, remaining positive and
Hmm.
focusing on the companies that are doing fantastic work to help us achieve these net zero emissions. Who are your primary customers, and how do you share your data, and do you collaborate with them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, yeah, I would say the biggest pool of our customers would be the industries themselves. So, a lot of oil and gas companies, like I said, coal mining, even landfill operators, things like that. So, we're trying to work directly with the industrial partners because they know they have to do things about their emissions, and they want the best tools and the best tech to do it. So, we want to work with them to give them that information. So that's a part of it. So we have a way to deliver these imagery to them that they can then build into their operations and review and make decisions. And in fact, even when we don't see an emission, it's something important to them, right? They know, okay, at least, hey, we know we don't have something there, right? Even having no emissions or having an image where we don't see anything, that tells them something as well. So that's who we mostly work with, but we're also working with other stakeholders. So governments are obviously interested in having some oversight of what's going on in industry. And another interesting one is the financial sector. So a lot of these big banks, they're investing in energy companies, and they want to make sure that the companies they're investing in have good environmental and social governance policies. And one way to sort of kind of oversee that is to just see what the emissions are doing coming from different areas. So that's another industry that is interested in this data.
Okay, great. Thank you, Warren. I think we have a couple of other questions. In relation to funding, how is your work being funded, Warren?
Yeah, great question. So we're generating revenue. So as we work with customers, right, they're paying for some of this data. We also have investors in our company. So and a lot of the investors, again, are on the industrial side. They see the benefit to this kind of technology, and they want to develop that. So they will actually invest in the company, which brings in some capital, which we can in turn invest and build more satellites and grow and expand that way.
Great, excellent. Um, okay. Do you know how much it costs to launch one of your GHG satellites into space?
Yeah, great question. I don't know the specific numbers. We're going to be in the low millions, kind of a way. What can I say? I can say that if you think about even 20 years ago, right, putting something into space. I mean, that was where that's NASA, that's the big space agencies. I mean, we were talking hundreds of millions of dollars, but there's been a real change lately. Commercial rocket providers like SpaceX and Rocket Lab are bringing the costs down, and they're doing what's called ride sharing. So as you saw in that one clip, we weren't the only satellite. I mean, that used to be what it was. You'd have big school bus sized satellites, going up, and it would be just one on the rocket. But now you're getting, tens, if not over 100 satellites on a given rocket, kind of ride share. So everyone pays a little bit, and then you get spit out at the right orbit. So that's also bringing the cost down. So it's a really exciting time in space, and certainly the idea of small satellites can actually have big impact. And so we're a small Canadian company. We've got 12 satellites. We've launched 12 satellites. But even at the university level, university student programs are launching satellites and doing cool research and stuff that way. So so prices have come down for sure, and so it's a really exciting time. Yeah.
Wow, great. I love that idea of rideshare for satellites. That's
Yeah,
brilliant.
exactly.
Are there any technological roadblocks that GHGSat has had to work through or are currently working on?
Yeah, that's another great question. I love these questions. For sure, every time we are putting together a new satellite, we're going to try to incorporate the best optics, the best electronics. So we're always trying to, stay on top of the evolving technologies that go into the satellite. So that's one way that we want to always continue to improve. One of the things as well, I think, is we need to get that data down, right? So, um, if we can get this information into the hands of those who need it as quickly as possible, it has more value to them, right? If we see a plume, but we can't give it to them for several weeks, right, that data's gotten old and a bit stale, and so it doesn't have the same impact. So advancements in technology in terms of communicating to downlink the data, that'll be important as well. And we'll see, we'll see where it goes. Obviously, there's other greenhouse gases beyond carbon dioxide and methane. So we could start to look at, could we fine tune the spectroscopy? What part of the wavelength range are we focusing on, perhaps to tailor to other gases? So there's lots of neat ways that we can continue to push forward. Yeah.
Yeah, and I can see technology plays a huge part in your what you guys are trying to do there at GHGSat as well. Um, okay. How will you measure your progress and what does success mean to you?
Excellent question. Yeah. Yeah, excellent question. In some ways, progress, and that's one of the things I mentioned a little bit about keeping track of the impact that we have, right? So as we deliver this data to customers, we want to follow up with them and try to continue that conversation of, how relevant did what we provide you, how did that turn into action on the ground and turning emission, shutting an emission down? So one of the ways that we will track what our impact is will be through trying to find that direct link between what our data, emissions prevented based on our data. So that's one way that I think we'll be able to work towards success. Another one is obviously, as you saw in the video, I mean, it's an ambitious goal, but that idea that every industrial site to be monitored. So that'll require a bigger constellation of satellites and continued growth in the number that we put up there so that we can continue to provide good service to our customers by being able to repeat measurements more frequently, getting down towards daily repeat measurements. And in regions where there's a lot of activity, we'll have more capacity there to be able to service more customers. So yeah, those are some of the ways I think that will show success. And yeah, I think as I said a little bit about the development side of things, right? As we continue to press into perhaps other greenhouse gases, that might be another way that we know we're on the right track if we can not only hit these two, but start to look at some of the other ones as well.
Excellent. Okay, that's fantastic. Oh, one more question.
Sure.
Do you use KPIs?
We do. Yeah. So every team in the company will have different KPIs, right? So some of the more technical KPIs could be on performance of the instruments. What threshold of detection can we see? Can we get that lower and lower so we can see smaller and smaller emissions? But across the company, we'll have KPIs. So the sales team, internal administrative teams will all have these key performance indicators that we're working towards. And that's another way to keep us on track to make sure that all that we do is sticking close to our mission and vision, and that we're pushing ourselves as well. Yeah, great
Excellent.
questions.
And just one last question I had. How do you name the satellites?
Great question. Yeah, this is something that's been kind of fun. So, you saw that one being sent out of the rocket, C7. So that's the seventh one of the constellation. But we give it a human name as well. And so that one was Gaspard. And so what we do is we name the satellites after children of employees at the company. And so the
Oh,
idea here is that this is we have the next generation in mind, and so by using the names of our children as friendly names for the satellites, it just makes that connection to the next generation that we're doing this for a purpose a little more clear. Yeah. Great question.
Wow, that's really beautiful. Thank you so much, Warren.
Yeah.
Um, okay, all right, everyone. That brings us to the end of our presentation for today. Thank you so much, Warren, for taking the time to join us today and keep up the great work at GHGSat. We'll definitely be following you.
Thank you.
Um,
Thanks for the opportunity.
thank you. So we hope you were able to learn something from the presentation today. Learn Energy started on the quest for net zero emissions because we believe young people hold significant power to make net zero emissions a reality. And this is why we want you to meet the organizations and technology companies leading the way. We'd love to hear any feedback you guys might have, and we are still in our early stages of development here at Learn Energy, which means that we're always looking to make what we do the best it can possibly be, and most importantly, the most accessible as it can be for young people. If anyone has any questions, remarks, or you would just like to get in touch with us, I've left our email in the chat and I will tell you the email address again. It's kking at learnenergy.net. That's kking at learnenergy.net. And the website is www.learnenergy.net. And we are looking forward to seeing you at the next presentation. Thank you so much for joining us. Bye bye, everyone.